Strange and the spooky, adventurous and loony, they're all together ooky, the Bud family. Their trips are amazing when people come to see 'em. They really are amazing, the Bud family. History, ghost, art. So put on a witch's shawl on, a seat so you can relax on. We're gonna play a call on the Bud family. It is Wayback Wednesday. We are almost in the middle of October. Friday will be Joe and I's anniversary. I have a couple of ideas for a short, so look forward to that. Hopefully, we will have our 1400 shout out done by then. That should be Friday's video. Joe and I are celebrating our anniversary by doing something special, which I will talk about Friday. In the meantime, we have to do an individual shout out. Are you ready? Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. Today I have chosen a Halloween themed race, which is Monsters. I think it was just called Halloween, if I remember correctly. Start. Oh, there we go. Okay. Here go the monsters. See, we've got some mummies and some. There's a doctor, and there's a vampire, and there's a Frankenstein, and there's a demon. There's a dragon over there. I think that's what that is. We've got Southern National, which is a mummy, or a crazy person, I guess. He's not a mummy. Miss T, Esha, Wit, Hillbilly, Derman, visiting. Praying is a little alien. Seek is a pirate. We've got some werewolves in there, whose names I can't see. We've got a ghost reaper person over there. There's Heather, who's a pirate. SD Mountain Man is going to be the crazy peoples. Oh, visiting. Is it going to be visiting? It is visiting. Oh, that was fast again. Okay. This is Visiting Dead Adventures. Graveyards, ghost adventures, small backwoods cemeteries, lots and lots of cemeteries. He is posts very often, very frequently, a couple times a day, sometimes. So check them out. Like, share, comment. Well, good day. Enjoy Joy's ramblings also. All right. Tell us something interesting, Mr. Bud.
Okay, class. You know, if I'm ever going to take and put up a topic that we're going to take and argue about, let's go ahead and have a fun one. Now, this last week, on Monday, we had, depending on where you lived, Columbus Day or Native American Day, or Indigenous People Day, if you want to spread it out a little bit. And for, a good, I'd say at least 25 years of my life was Columbus Day, and we celebrated Columbus in 1492, sailed the ocean blue, yada, yada, yada. And, for the most part, it was what he did. He set sail from the world as we know it at that time and sailed across the Atlantic, which, in 1492 was no small feat. He was sailing with 3 ships. He had to deal with, weather. He had to deal with a crew that was ready to throw him overboard. In fact, I was reading one place that he actually kept 2 diaries. One with the actual distance that they had gone, and one that was for the crew only to show that they were safer and more organized to where they were going. he finally made a deal with them. He said that if we don't find land in the next 2 days, we're going to turn around and head back. But as the history goes along, from what I was reading, is that, a lot of it comes down to a quest for Asia. A lot of the world at that time stretched from, basically where Spain, France, and England was, across the mainland, past where Constantinople was. It got taken up by the Ottoman Empire in 1453, and then the Silk Road got shut down to Christian traders. Well, a couple people at that time started tinkering with the idea of sailing west across the Atlantic. A fellow from Florence, Paolo di Pozzo Toscanelli, there's an Italian name like you cannot imagine, in 1474 made a suggestion to King Alfonso V of Portugal that it would be a quicker way to reach the Spice Islands in China, Japan, and India than the route around Africa. Alfonso gave this idea a thumbs down. In the 1480s, Columbus and his brother proposed a plan to reach the East Indies by sailing west, and Columbus supposedly wrote Toscanelli in 1481 and received encouragement, along with a copy of a map the astronomer had sent Alfonso, implying a westward route to Asia was possible. Columbus's plans were complicated by Bartholomew Diaz's rounding of the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, which suggested the Cape route around Africa to Asia. Well, different commentators have argued that Columbus was a Christian minimalist and apocalyptic that said that these beliefs motivated his quest for Asia after a variety of ways. Columbus often wrote about seeking gold in the longbooks in his voyages, and writes about acquiring in such quantity that the sovereigns will undertake and prepare to go conquer the Holy Sepulchre in a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Columbus often also wrote about converting all races to Christianity. Now, the only thing is to think about in 1492, though, you look at their time frame that they had to deal with. You had big ships that were made out of wood. A vessel at any time at this size, you're talking maybe 3-4 months of sailing, and you're not sure how big the globe is in the first place. From what I remember from my school days, the estimates that they were talking, the size of the Earth was about a third smaller. And so making that shot with, the 3 ships, was going to be ambitious. Columbus, as a kid, growing up in Genoa, he loved the idea of sailing. I mean, he had a son, Diego. In between 1482 and 85, he traded along the coast of West Africa. He reached the Portuguese trading post of Elmina at the Guinea coast in present-day Ghana. So he was already going to different continents. He just hadn't gone that way yet. Sadly, he also found out in 1484, he returned to Porto Santo, find out that his wife had passed away. He returned to Portugal to settle her estate and take Diego with him. And he left Portugal for Castile in 1485. He took on a mistress, a 20-year-old orphan named Beatriz Enriquez de Ana, or Ana, I should say. And it's likely that Beatriz met Columbus when he was in Cordoba, a gathering place for Genoese merchants, and where the court of Catholic monarchs were located at intervals. Beatriz, unmarried at the time, gave birth to Columbus' second son, Fernando Columbus, in 1488, and named for the monarch of Aragon. But the big thing came down to it is that somebody was going to have to make that first step. And, of course, by truth, he didn't discover America. We've already come up to that conclusion before. The Vikings got there first. In fact, there's still remnants of a longhouse in Nova Scotia, or if you really want to throw somebody a total loop, somewhere in the middle of the United States, I think it's either in Ohio or Kentucky, that there's a stone with Norse runes on it. But there's people thinking that was a prank.
Why would it be a prank?
Oh, I don't know, because the Vikings didn't wander that far south.
Nah.
But as for Columbus, shed a little light on the guy here. It's an angelization of the Latin Christophorus Columbus. Growing up on the coast of Liguria, he went to sea at a young age, traveled widely, as far north as the British Isles and down to Ghana. He married a Portuguese noblewoman, Felipe Moniz Pestrello, bore the son Diego, and was based in Lisbon for several years. And then, like we were mentioning, his Castilian mistress, who also gave him a son, Ferdinand. Now, he was largely self-educated, though. Here's a kid. School? What school? We don't need school. Knowledgeable in geography, astronomy, and history, and developed a plan to seek the Western Sea Passage to the East Indies, hoping to profit from a lucrative spice trade. And after the Granada War and Columbus's persistent lobbying with multiple kingdoms, the Catholic monarchs, Queen Isabella I and King Ferdinand II, agreed to sponsor a journey west. How big of a talk do you have to give to impress a king and a queen with no schooling, but enough for them to say, okay, shut up, we'll give you a couple boats? And not just the boats, you had to have a crew. Because you think about the old-fashioned wooden ships. You had sails, you had to have people that could cook, you had to have people that knew how to operate the riggings and everything. That's a heck of an investment. That's not something you just go, oh, here's an Amex. We're gonna go borrow your ship. It doesn't work like that. This is the 1490s. Now, he left Castile in August of 1492 with 3 ships. He made landfall in the Americas on the 12th of October, ending a period of human habitation of the Americas, now referred to as the pre-Columbian era. His landing place was an island in the Bahamas known by the native inhabitants as Guani. He visited islands known as Cuba and Hispaniola, establishing a colony in what is now Haiti. Columbus returned to Castile in 1493 with several captured natives, and word of his voyage soon spread throughout Europe. I mean, all of a sudden people are like, you ran into what? And it had to be both kind of a shock, but also at the same time, do we want to believe you? I mean, you're saying you just came from well, look, there's people,
Yeah.
Surprise. He would wind up making 3 other voyages to the Americas, exploring the Lesser Antilles in 1493, Trinidad and the northern coast of South America in 1498, and the east coast of Central America in 1502. Many names have been given to geographical figures, namely islands, are still in use. He gave the name Indios, or Indians, to the indigenous peoples that he encountered, which I still say is, I love the fact that people say, don't call us Indians, we're Native Americans. I have a better look at it, okay? I was born here. I live here. Probably going to die here, okay? I am native to this area. Call me a Native American. They are original Americans because they were here first. That's how I'd go on that route, because, you think about how many people have been born in the United States. You have people that come over the border that are born. You have people that have settled here that are born. You have people that are, I think, generation-wise, it's been maybe about 12 generations. My family's lived in the United States.
Right.
Of course, we also came from Britain. We also came from Wales. We came from Sweden. We came from Norway. Some of us are a little German. My wife puts it the best, Heinz 57.
Heinz 57.
Because you can't say that you're from a single country when you're like us. We're mutts, you know. That's the way we look at it. There is so many nationalities crawling around inside a single American. Well, another thing, when growing up, they used to say that we were the melting pot. We still are, you know. And some people hate that idea that, oh, heaven forbid, you know, I'm not all German, or I'm not all French, or I'm not all England. That's what makes some of us unique, is the fact that we don't have a single race. We have multiple races built into a single person. It's kind of fun. I mean, you know, me and Sue are related, you know, both geographically, genetically, and family. So, you know, of course, then if you want to take and play it technical, you know, there's always, you know, Frank James and, you know, a few outlaws. But anyway, back to our happy buddy with Columbus and his trip. It started off a period of exploration, conquest, and colonization that lasted for years. You know, people wanted to go out and see what else was out there. Maps were made, globes were designed, ideas on where and all, you know, people could go and settle. Now, a couple of the things that wound up fracturing his, you know, public perception in the 21st century due to greater attention to the harms committed under his governance. For example, the depopulation of Hispaniola's, Tainos, old world diseases, mistreatment, including slavery. Many places in the Western Hemisphere still bear his name. South American country of Colombia, the Canadian province of British Columbia, the American city of Columbus, Ohio, the U.S. Capitol, and the District of Columbia. But, you know, you want to also go back through Columbus and, you know, first of all, in a way, I don't think it is quite fair to try and saddle Columbus with diseases. Okay. When he got into his boat in August of 1492, I'm pretty sure he said, hey, guess what? Let's pack up some diseases and let's send it to wherever we're going to go to.
Right?
It didn't work that way. You know, first of all, he was a guy on the ship, and they were going to set sail to try to find a new way to the Spice Lands. They weren't going to go find indigenous people, infect them, and kill them off with illness.
Oh, that wasn't the goal?
I didn't see that anywhere in his memoirs. You know,
Damn it.
And at the same time, the thing I'm also curious on, when the Vikings landed back in, trying to remember what year it was, the 11th century, 10th century, I don't remember them spreading any virus or illness down to the Native Americans either. So that alone I'm also kind of curious on. Now, you do have to admit on the other side is that when more and more Europeans started to land in America and make their way westward, those people also did bring diseases. And some people did, you know, see tribes decimated because the Native Americans had no natural immunity. You know, smallpox, it's well shown. But then, you know, you go down through what Columbus had to do, okay? He, first of all, wasn't taught a lot of his information. You know, he showed a lot of spirit for being a young person on what he wanted to do in the world. You know? Now, his early life, like they're saying, scholars believe he was born in the Republic of Genoa about between the 25th of August and the 31st of October, Halloween, in 1451. Father Domenico Colombo was a wool weaver and worked in Genoa and Savona and owned a cheese stand in which young Christopher worked. His mom, Susanna Fantarosa, and he had three brothers, Bartholomew, Giovanni Pellerino, and Giacomo, also known as Diego, and a sister, Blanchinetta. Blanche!
Mm-hmm.
Bartholomew ran a cartography workshop in Lisbon for at least part of his adulthood. Now, his native language was presumed to have been Genoese dialect in his first language, although Columbus probably never wrote in it. His name in the 16th century Genoese was Cristoforo Colombo, in Italian, Cristoforo Colombo, and in Spanish, Cristobal Colon. In one of his writings, it says that he went to sea at age 14 in 1470. The family moved to Savona, where Domenico took over a tavern. Some modern authors have argued that he was not from Girona, but was from Aragon, the region of Spain, or from Portugal. Competing hypotheses have been discounted by most scholars. 1473, Columbus began his apprenticeship as a business agent for the wealthy Spinola, Centurion, and the Del Negro families of Girona. Later, he made a trip to the Greek island Chiros in the Aegean Sea and then ruled by Girona. In May of 1476, he took part in an armed convoy sent by Girona to carry valuable cargo to northern Europe. He probably visited Bristol, England, and Galway, Ireland, where he may have visited St. Nicholas Collegiate Church. It is speculated that he went to Iceland in 1477, though many doubt this. It is known that in the autumn of 1477 he sailed on a Portuguese ship from Galway to Lisbon, where he found his brother Bartholomew, and they continued trading for the Centurion family. Columbus based himself in Lisbon for a period of about 8 years, and the Centurion sent Columbus on a sugar-buying trip to Madeira. He married Filipa Pestrello de Montes, a daughter of the Bartholomew Pestrello, a Portuguese nobleman of Lombard region, who had been the donatory captain of Porto Santo. Well, as things would go along, he left Castile in 1485, where he took a mistress, again, Beatriz Enriquez Arana, after his wife had died. And then in 1488, his second son was named the monarch of Aragon. Columbus recognized the boy as his offspring. Columbus entrusted his older legitimate son Diego to take care of Beatrice and pay the pension set aside for her following his death. In his duties. Poor kid.
Didn't do his job.
No. Columbus now learned Latin, Portuguese, and Castilian. There's 3 heck of languages to work with.
I never even heard of Castilian.
And he read widely about astronomy, geography, and history, and included the works of Ponte, Pierre de Alais' Imago Mundi, the travels of Marco Polo and Sir John Mandeville, Pliny's Natural History, and Pope Pius II Historia Rubrique Justarium. And according to the historian Edward Morgan, Columbus was not a scholarly man, yet he studied these books, made hundreds of marginal notations in them, and came out with ideas about the world that were characteristically simple, strong, and sometimes wrong. Now, as I mentioned, at that time, a lot of the world was looking at ways to try to get to the spice lands over in China, Japan, and India. It's a long route, both on land. Taking ships sometimes was thought would make it a simple course. It was a popular misconception to the contrary that nearly all educated Westerners of the Columbus time knew the Earth was spherical, and it was a concept that had been understood since antiquity. The techniques of celestial navigation, using the sextants and stuff, the sun, the stars, and the sky had long been in use by astronomers and were beginning to be implemented by mariners. As far back as the 3rd century BC, Eratosthenes had correctly computed the circumference of the Earth by using simple geometry and studying the shadows cast by objects at 2 remote locations. All the way back to the 1st century BC, Poseidonus confirmed the results by comparing stellar observations at 2 separate locations. These measurements were widely known among scholars, but Ptolemy's use of the smaller, old-fashioned units of distance led Columbus to understand the size of the Earth by about a third. Like I say, they missed it a little bit.
No.
Now, 3 cosmographical parameters determined the bounds of Columbus's enterprise. The distance across the ocean between Europe and Asia, which depended on the extent of the Okamene, the Eurasian landmass stretching east to west between Spain and China, the circumference of the Earth, and the number of miles or leagues in a distance and a degree of longitude, which was possible to deduce from the theory that the relationship between the size of the surface of the water and the land as held by the followers of Aristotle in medieval times. Now, one of the authors I'd mentioned earlier, Pierre d'Ailly's Imago Mundi from 1410, Columbus learned at Africanus's estimate that the degree of latitude, equal to approximately a degree of longitude along the equator, spanned 56.67 Arabic miles, or equivalent to 66.2 nautical miles, but did not realize that this is expressed in the Arabic mile rather than the shorter Roman mile, which he was more familiar with. Columbus therefore estimated the size of the Earth to be about 75% of Eratosthenes' calculations, and the distance westward from the Canary Islands to the Indies was only 68 degrees, or about 3,540 miles, 58% error.
Woo!
Most scholars at the time accepted Ptolemy's estimate of the Eurasia spanning the 180-degree longitude rather than the actual 130 degree to the Chinese mainland, or 150 degrees to the Japan at the latitude of Spain. Columbus believed an even higher estimate, leaving the smaller percentage for water. In the Imago Mundi, Columbus read Martos of Tyre's estimate that the longitude span of Eurasia was 225 degrees at the latitude of Rhodes, and some historians, such as the Samuel Morison, had suggested he follow the statement of the apocryphal book Second Herodotus that 6 parts of the globe are habitable and the 7th is covered with water. He is also aware of Marco Polo's claim that Japan, which he called Chipkakandu, was some 1,500 miles to the east of China, or Cathay, was closer to the equator than it is. He was influenced by Toscanelli's idea that there were inhabited islands even further to the east than Japan, including the mythical Antilla, which he thought might not lie much further to the west than the Azores. Now, based on these sources, Columbus estimated a distance of 2,800 miles from the Canary Islands west to Japan. The actual distance was 12,200 miles.
Oops, I forgot the decimal point.
Yes, no ship in the 15th century could have carried enough food and fresh water for such a long voyage, and the dangers involved in navigating through such an uncharted ocean would have been formidable.
No.
Most European navigators reasonably concluded that a westward voyage from Europe to Asia was unfeasible.
Oops.
Now, again, somehow Columbus approached the Catholic monarchs, and, however, having completed the Reconquista, an expensive war against the Moors in the Iberian Peninsula, were eager to obtain a competitive edge over other European countries in the quest for trade with the Indies. Columbus's project, though far-fetched, held the promise of such an advantage. King, Queen, I got an idea. I want to run it by you. Okay, just hear me out. Okay, we're gonna grab a couple boats from you. We're gonna stock them with people and provisions, and we're going to go sailing. Okay. Now, though Columbus was wrong about the number of degrees in the longitude that separated Europe from the Far East and about the distance to which each degree represented, it did take advantage of the trade winds, which would prove to be the key of successful navigation of the Atlantic Ocean. The plan was first to sail to the Canary Islands before continuing west with the northeast trade wind. Part of the return to Spain would require traveling against the wind using arduous sailing techniques called beating, during which the progress was made very slowly.
Yeah.
We're going to beat the wind to effectively.
Good luck with that one.
Yeah, not seeing that working very well. To effectively make this return voyage, Columbus would need to follow the curving trade North Atlantic, where he'd be able to catch the westerlies that blow eastward to the coast.
Why are they called the
Western
westerlies if they blow eastward?
No, you're overthinking it.
Ah!
Now, this navigational technique for travel in the Atlantic appears to have been exploited first by the Portuguese, who referred to it as turn of the sea. Though his marriage to his first wife, Columbus had access to the nautical charts and logs that belonged to her deceased father, Bartholomew Pestrolo, who had served as captain of the Portuguese Navy under Prince Henry the Navigator.
And in the map-making shop where he worked with his brother Bartholomew, Columbus also had ample opportunity to hear stories of old seamen about their voyages in the western seas, but his knowledge of the Atlantic wind patterns were still imperfect at the time of the first voyage. By sailing due west from the Canary Islands during hurricane season, he skirted the so-called horse latitudes of the mid-Atlantic. He risked being becalmed and running into a tropical cyclone, both of which he avoided by chance. Let's roll the dice, kids.
Whee!
Now again, about 1484, Columbus proposed the planned voyage to King John II of Portugal. The king submitted Columbus's proposal to his advisors, who rejected it correctly on the grounds that Columbus's estimate for the voyage was only a quarter of what it should have been. Now, in 1488, Columbus again approached the court of Portugal, and John II again granted him an audience. The meeting proved unsuccessful, in part because not long afterwards, Bartholomew Diaz returned from Portugal with news of the successful rounding of the southern tip of Africa near the Cape of Good Hope. Columbus sought the audience with the monarchs Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, who had united several kingdoms in their Iberian Peninsula by marrying and now ruling together. On the 1st of May, 1486, permission had been granted. Columbus presented his plans to Queen Isabella, who in turn referred it to a committee. The learned men of Spain, like their counterparts in Portugal, replied that Columbus had grossly underestimated the distance to Asia. They pronounced the idea impractical and advised the Catholic monarchs to pass on the proposed venture. Queen, the guy's nuts.
Yeah.
To keep Columbus from taking the ideas elsewhere, though, or perhaps keeping options open, the sovereigns gave him an allowance, about 14,000 maravedis for the year, or about an annual salary of a sailor. In May of 1489, the Queen sent him another 10,000 maravedis, and the same year, monarchs furnished him with a letter ordering all cities and towns under their dominion to provide him food and lodging at no cost. Keep him supplied so he doesn't go out and discover the new world or something.
Keep him busy.
Of course, at the same time, if they just let him go off on his own, he might take care of his own problem.
Right? Just
Anyway, Columbus had dispatched his brother Bartholomew to the court of Henry VII of England to inquire whether the English crown might sponsor his expedition, but he was captured by pirates en route and only arrived in early 1491.
Wow.
Oops. By that time, Columbus had retreated to La Rabada Fiore, which the Spanish crown had sent him 20,000 maravedis to buy new clothing and instructions to return to the Spanish court for renewed discussions. Well, Columbus waited at King Ferdinand's camp until Ferdinand and Isabella conquered Granada, the last Muslim stronghold on the Iberian Peninsula, in January of 1492. A council led by Isabella's confessor, Hernando de Talavera, found Columbus' proposal to reach the Indies implausible. Columbus had left for France when Ferdinand intervened by first sending Talavera and Bishop Diego Deza to appeal to the Queen. Isabel was finally convinced that the king's clerk, Louis Santiago, who argued that the Columbus would take his ideas elsewhere, and offered to help arrange the funding. Isabella sent a royal guard to fetch Columbus, who had traveled 2 leagues, or 10 kilometers, towards Cordoba. And in April 1492, Capitulans of Santa Fe, King Ferdinand, and Queen Isabella promised Columbus that if he succeeded, he would be given the rank of Admiral of the Ocean Sea and appointed Viceroy and Governor of all the new lands he might claim for Spain. He had the right to nominate 3 persons, from whom the sovereigns would choose one for any office in the new lands. He would be entitled to 10% of all the revenues from the new lands in perpetuity. He would also have the option of buying 1/8 interest in any commercial venture in the new lands and receive 1/8 of the profits. In 1500, after his third voyage to the Americas, Columbus was arrested and dismissed from his posts. He and his sons, Diego and Fernando, then conducted a lengthy series of court cases against the Castilian crown known as the Pleitos Comedinos, alleging the crown had illegally reneged on its contractual obligations to Columbus and his heirs. The Columbus family had some success in their first litigation, and the judgments of 1511 confirmed Diego's position as viceroy, but reduced his powers. Diego resumed litigation in 1512 and lasted until 1536, and further disputes initiated by heirs continued until 1790. Well, as the history that we all read in school, between 1492 and 1504, Columbus completed 4 round trips between Spain and the Americas, each voyage being sponsored by the Crown of Castile. First voyage reached the Americas, initiating European exploration and colonization of the continent, as well as the Columbian Exchange. His role in history was important to the age of discovery, Western history, and human history at large. Now, here's where it also becomes kind of an interesting scenario when you think about Columbus. Again, somebody had to be the first fella. Not a lot was left over for information that the Vikings had on their attempt to, settle, make a base, and obviously didn't stick around long enough. There's no huge Viking settlements up in, northern Canada, up in the Arctic. There are a lot of different Native American tribes and groups that occupied all of North America, Central America, South America. But to this degree, somebody was going to have to be that first person, whether it was going to be Columbus, whether it was going to be somebody from England, whether it was going to be somebody from Portugal. Somebody was going to have to make that first step. And once Columbus, to borrow the phrase, cracked that eggshell, a lot of other people started setting out for the New World. They all wanted a slice. Spain and Portugal both wanted their hands on the New World, as it was. Technically, it wasn't even a New World. Now, the other side of this coin, and this is one that I've also looked at a bit on my side, is when you look at North America, and a lot of the people have their speculations on how big and how populated it was. We've all seen the maps of the different tribes that existed in different places. They talk all about how originally the East Coast was lined with tribes and settlements. The one thing I did find kind of funny is that they based a lot of their estimates off of an observation, and I believe it was a Frenchman who said there's got to be about 3 million people along that coast. Well, the second time that they came through, they were decimated by almost 90%. And a lot of them were thinking, as viruses, different diseases came in, we don't know what in all happened to a lot of those tribes, because not a lot of them had initial contact with the Europeans. I mean, if you think about the Appalachian Mountains, or Appalachian Hills, if you want to call it the way the Dakotas do, once you got past the Appalachian Mountains, there was a physical barrier, and the Native Americans behind it never had any contact until later on. There was some information that I remember reading about how the Spaniards, they obviously went through Central America. They made some small journeys up into, at that time would have been where Kansas and places like that are in the United States. And they found cities that are basically buried in people's backyards, because some of the settlements the Native Americans had were absolutely huge. But the other grand question that I've got is, did the Native Americans ever contemplate the idea of journeying out from the lands? A lot of them probably didn't, because they had everything they needed. They had land, they had food, and as the needs came, if they needed, slaves of their own, they would attack another tribe. A lot of the tribes migrated. They followed the food sources. You look at the Native Americans up here in the Dakotas, for example, the Lakota, the Teton, they all started out primarily working as farmers, But then, as they needed to hunt the buffalo, they would go where the buffalo did. If there were droughts, they went to places where there was still rain. And so a lot of the tribes, were happy where they were. Of course, at the same time, a lot of people don't realize this, but the United States general area always seemed to have had a problem with hurricanes.
What?
Whether it was coming up through the Gulf of Mexico or off the East Coast. I mean, even California never really got completely out of the woods, but then again, they always had earth-shaking issues.
Yeah. Shake, shake, shake it, baby.
Shake it, shake it, shake it. Big cracks in the ground. But, to the effect, I think Columbus got a bad rap. Because, again, nobody else, they started going down south. They went around the Cape of Good Hope. They had people that were still trying to cross Asia on foot. Columbus tried to come up with an idea, using what knowledge he had, to say, let's try going this way for a chance. And he just happened to talk a real good game to get over there to America and basically start the New World. It was a world that was already in existence, but at the same time, somebody had to be that first guy. But this has been the Bearded Historian rambling on. But you folks have a good evening out there, and we'll see you next week. Class dismissed.